Hello, everybody. Hope everybody is doing well and this finds you healthy and safe from a distance. Um, I thought this would be a great thing to share. I just ordered this and I miss all of the third graders. And I know we had been enjoying Humphrey every day at lunch, and I didn't want you to go about not knowing how the world of Humphrey ended. So I'm going to read some chapters, finish the book with you, and hopefully you can enjoy the adventures of Humphrey. This morning, talking to my class, I think we figured out which chapter we ended at. I think we finished here, which is Garth versus AJ. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in and enjoy. If you have dogs or cats, you have to be very careful not to let them get near Humphrey. Miranda warned the rest of the class when we returned to room 26. You remember Humphrey went home with Miranda and she had a dog named Clem. Yeah, well, she's back in class now. It's Monday and she's kind of reporting around about her time with Humphrey at her house. You can say that again, I squeaked, but she didn't. I still considered Golden Miranda to be a very special friend, and I had a very clean cage to show for my weekend, as well as a new respect for rubber bands. Do you remember that? The rubber bands. But I also decided that even though Miranda is practically a perfect person, I was not in a hurry to stay with her again. AJ raised his hand and Mrs. Brisbane called on him. May I have Humphrey this weekend? We don't have a dog or a cat. Lower your voice, AJ. I'll let you know on Thursday. There may be other students who want Humphrey as well. At least half of the hands in the classroom went up as kids started shouting, me, 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 me. I was really quite flattered, but for some reason, the whole subject seemed to make Garth mad. So within minutes, we got a rubber band, or he shot a rubber band at AJ. Ouch! AJ complained loudly. When he told the teacher what happened, Garth denied it. Humphrey did it. Gail giggled. Mrs. Brisbane did not. I don't believe a hamster can shoot a rubber band, she said sternly. A lot she knows. The next day, Garth stuck his foot out and he tripped Art as he went to sharpen his pencil. I didn't do it. He's just clumsy, Garth protested when Mrs. Brisbane angrily scolded him. That same day, Garth pushed Gail at morning recess. He spent afternoon recess inside. Garth Tugwell, you're halfway to Principal Morales' office right now. Mrs. Brisbane sounded really angry. Garth just shrugged his shoulders. On Wednesday, Garth sneaked back into the room while Mrs. Brisbane went to the office during recess. He headed straight for my cage. The two of us were all alone in the room. Hello, Rat. Why don't you just run away? Then nobody will take you home on the weekend, he said. And he opened my cage door and he grabbed me. You'd like your freedom, wouldn't you, Rat? He set me on the floor. Oh man, my heart was pounding. Thump, thump, thump. Go on, Rat, skedaddle. And he gave me a little push with his hand. I scampered under the table. I wanted to say something, but for the first time ever, I was squeakless. Have fun, he said, and in an instant, he was gone. I was pretty confused. For one thing, I didn't want to run away. I was perfectly happy staying in room 26 and having adventures on the weekend. Where would I go? What would I do? There was no time to waste. I scampered over to the cord that hung down from the blinds and I grabbed onto it. And then I started the old swinging routine, back and forth, swinging a little higher each time until I reached the tabletop. Back and forth and back and forth. And then I leapt. There wasn't time to think about my queasy stomach as I raced into my cage, slamming the door and shut it behind me. Just then, Mrs. Brisbane returned, and I darted into my sleeping house so she wouldn't see how hard I was breathing. I saw her look at the window, puzzled. She walked over to it and stared at the blind cord, which was still swinging. She reached out. She stopped it with her hand. And then she shook her head and walked away. When recess was over and my classmates filed back into the room, Garth looked at my cage, half smiling. But that smile quickly disappeared when he saw that the door was closed. He leaped out of his seat and he looked into my cage. "Howdy," I squeaked. "Garth, please get back into your seat," Mrs. Brisbane told him. "But Humphrey," he protested. "Well, what is it?" Mrs. Brisbane was getting a little irritated. "He's in his cage." A few of the classmates just giggled, not Mrs. Brisbane. "In case you haven't noticed, he's always in his cage, Garth. Now get back to your seat." Garth did what she said. Garth did what she said. For the rest of the day, I noticed him staring over at me. On Thursday, Mrs. Brisbane announced that I would be spending the weekend at AJ's house. "Yes!" shouted AJ, delighted by that news. Few seconds later, a whole series of rubber bands hit AJ on the neck, his shoulder, and his head. "Cool it, Garth," yelled AJ, jumping out of his chair. "Man, I'm tired of those rubber bands." Garth acted innocent. "I don't know where they came from. They could have come from anywhere." "Garth did it," Heidi said. "I saw him." Mrs. Brisbane didn't remind Heidi to raise her hand, but she did tell Garth to stay in at recess. "It's not fair," Garth muttered. When the bell rang for recess, Garth stayed in his seat. Mrs. Brisbane closed the door when all the other students had left, and she walked over to his desk. Normally, I would have been napping at this time, but I was wide awake and wondering what the boy was going to say. "Garth, you've been acting strangely lately. You never got into trouble at all until 2 weeks ago. Now, shooting rubber bands at people and disturbing the entire class? Can you tell me why?" Garth slowly shook his head. "Your grades are slipping, hon. Has something changed in your life?" Garth slowly shook his head again. "How about at home? Is there anything wrong?" Garth didn't shake his head this time. He didn't move a muscle. "Should I talk to your parents about your behavior, Garth?" Garth's face got red. "No," he said with a choking sound. Mrs. Brisbane moved closer and put her hand on Garth's shoulder. "Please tell me what's wrong." "My mom, she's sick. Real sick." And then tears ran down his cheeks. I was feeling a little teary-eyed myself. Honey, how sick is she? Well, she lost all this weight and she was in and out of the hospital, and now she's just tired all the time. And he didn't even try to finish his sentence. Garth wiped away the tears with the tissue, and as Mrs. Brisbane handed it to him. That's why I can't take Humphrey home. My dad says we can't let anything bother my mom. Well, my little brother bothers her, and we let him in the house. Mrs. Brisbane smiled. Humphrey is a big responsibility, Garth. That's why I don't take him home. My husband's been sick too. Did you know that? Garth shook his head. No. So I know what it's like. Listen, I'll make a few phone calls tonight. Maybe we can find a way for you to spend some time with Humphrey. But he hates me, I squeaked. I'd like that, said Garth. Huh? I was so confused. But you have to promise me that you won't disrupt the class anymore, Mrs. Brisbane told him. Is that a deal? Deal, Garth said. And as you know, I'm very good at coming up with plans to help solve human problems. Very, very good. But try as I might, I couldn't imagine why Mrs. Brisbane's plan to get Garth to spend time with me could be. What could it be? I was still trying to figure out when Aldo arrived that night. Humphrey, my man, he yelled when he opened the door. I almost fell off my wheel. You are the most handsome, intelligent hamster in the world. And I am the luckiest man in the world because I'm dating the most beautiful woman in the world. Aldo swept up his way toward my cage, and then he lowered his voice. But don't tell anybody that I said so. Not yet. After all, Maria and I have only been out 3 times. But what times it has been. He pulled up a chair, and he sat very close to me. And it's all thanks to that Moonlighters Club and that clipping over there. He pointed towards the spot where the overhead projector had once stood. And you. I know you had something to do with it, Humphrey. I just can't figure out just how. Anyway, don't tell anybody. But someday, I'm going to marry Maria. And when I do, I want you, Humphrey, to be the best man. Best hamster, I guess. I really mean it. If you were a guy, I'd buy you a burger. And he reached in his pocket and he pulled out a little piece of foil. Instead, I got this for you. And he unwrapped a piece of carrot and he put it in my cage. Thank you, Aldo, I squeaked. I wish you lots of happiness. I knew you'd be happy for me, Humphrey. Aldo smiled and then he jumped up. Woo-hoo! I've got so much energy, I can clean this room in half the time. I could climb a mountain and not even get tired. I could conquer the world. And he leaned forward and he grinned through his glorious mustache. Ain't love grand? If you say so, I replied. If you can hear that sound, that's the wind blowing through our closed window. So it's a little windy outside. Sorry, I wasn't sure if you heard that. It's kind of loud. I had never seen anyone so happy before. The only thing that would make me that happy would be if Miss Mac came back. She's not coming back, though. And I'm still stuck with Mrs. Brisbane. And she's stuck with me. Say, what did she mean when she said she doesn't take me home because her husband's sick? Did she mean she would take me home if her husband wasn't sick? I thought about it all night and I came up with the answer. No, no, no. She doesn't take me home because she doesn't like me. Maybe I'm lucky after all. So that's the end of the chapter. The next chapter that we're going to read is chapter 11, and it is called TV or Not TV. So thank you all for joining. That's my squeaky chair. And I will look forward to reading the next chapter with you later. See you later, guys. Bye-bye.